the day after that was what I like to call our longest mission, which is really like when I think of OAR, I think of that mission. We did 4 runs into Afghanistan, but our second run was really the one that like meant something. And we alerted from Ramstein. Our jet was in Spangala. So that's an 1.5-hour bus ride.
Why'd you guys get separated?
Because our jet went into the system. As soon as we called safety of flight, they just started turning the jet. So we lost our jet.
They put another crew there.
It goes a new crew. Okay. It starts rolling. So when they alerted us the next day, the next available tail was up in Spangala.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, that's cool. We need to make sure the jet's running because I looked at the crew duty day and I was like, unless that jet's running, we're not going to make it. So remember how I said I had to have all the things, the computer, the NVGs, the gun? Well, some crews went out there without those things. They couldn't fly. So what they did is they helped out by prepping our jet, which was a godsend for us, but also a reason I was very thankful to have all of our equipment because it allowed us to accomplish the mission and keep going. So when I talk about this and when I teach some of the lessons learned, MinForce is a requirement. There's MinForce for yourself and MinForce for the mission. And to have that, it's extremely important. And it might not be the obvious MinForce out there. So we took off. We went to Spangala, started out, went to Al-Udeid. During that time, they expected ground time for refueling to be 1.5 hours because that was what the frag time was. That was the historical ground time for getting fuel at Al-Udeid. Al-Udeid's used to having 5 C-17s on the ramp, maybe 6.
They must have had a ton.
44. And they were all over the ramp. They were on the taxiways. They were in places that, like, if you could fit a C-17, they put one there. And if you think about it from a ground scheme of maneuver, from a maintenance standpoint, from a logistical standpoint, like, everybody was working their tails off, like, just trying to keep these jets rolling.
Common goal.
Exactly. And that's what it was. It was everybody coming together for that, against all odds, against all maintenance, shortages of supplies, anything of that. Like, it was people coming together, just making the mission happen. So it was 5 hours refueling there. Oh, by the way, the other instructor, Meg, got food poisoning en route. So the whole time we've been trying to call and see if we can get another augmented person on to be able to fly the whole 26-hour crew duty day. Couldn't get another one. Decided that, hey, she's like, we're going to press because we got a mission to do.
Hell yeah,
so
that's
we're
awesome.
Like, do it.
That sounds terrible too. At the same time, that's awesome, but it sounds awful.
Terrible. So we were getting ready to take off. And remember how I said the weapons school kind of acted as an overwatch for us? Like, they had been keeping tabs, texting me, saying, how you doing, watching our crew cuts. And one of them texted me and was like, hey, your crew just got pulled off this mission. And I was like, excuse me? Like, we're in the jet. And they're like, they just alerted another crew to take over your mission. I'm like, we have the entire crew duty. Like, we're going to do this.
Not if we beat them.
And that was exactly it. I was like, pardon my French, but the hell with that. We're going. And so I called. We were literally sitting at hold short for takeoff, trying to get our takeoff clearance. And they were looking for it in the system. That's why our flight plan wasn't in the system, because they were switching out the crews. By the act of God, seriously, somehow a flight plan appeared in the system. I don't know how, I don't know where, but we took it and we rolled with it. And no kidding, I talked to the crew later that got alerted. And I was like, did you guys actually get alerted? He was like, oh yeah, we turned up to no jet. It was great. I was like, I'm sorry, dude, but we rolled.
Yeah.
And so we went out, we flew out, landed. It was a daytime landing at that point. So you were used to essentially going into Afghanistan airspace, and it was pretty much uncontrolled at that time. You were just going along the waypoints. As soon as you got into a radius of the field, you'd start picking up two-way with the JTACs. You're talking to the other jets outbound. They're giving you weather updates or anything that you really need to know. You got clearance with the JTAC and you landed, and then you went into your parking spot. So the ground scheme of maneuver in Kabul at that point was actually very well done. Like, there was a battle rhythm. People knew what was going on. It just took a couple of days to get it down, and then it was a well-oiled machine. It was easier to be there than truthfully Al-Udeid, because that's where it was pretty much a junction between everybody coming in and going
You
out.
would say bureaucracy got in the way, and policies. I'll say it. Not you don't have to say it. Policies, bureaucracy, and processes probably got in the way.
Preach. Literally preach. Got on the ground, did our first upload. We we uploaded just over 500 at that point, and then I remember the ground crew coming on, and they're like, "Hey, who's aircraft commander?" And I was downstairs already helping with the upload, and I was like, "Yeah, what do you need?" And they're like, "We need you to sign for this PAX manifest." And I was like, "Okay, is it different here? Because usually the load masters do that, but like maybe processes are different because of the situation." They're like, "No, we'd like to bring on 24 orphans, and we need you to sign as their legal guardian right now." That's a gut check.
Whoa.
I went from having 0 kids to 24 in a matter of seconds, which was wild.
And you're not going to not sign that.
No, of course we wanted the kid. We're like, bring them on and you sign it. But you just realize the gravity of the situation. The humanistic side comes out. Like, these kids don't have parents. And they might have parents, but their parents sent them without them. So that might be the situation. Or maybe they don't know where their parents are. Or maybe they were left behind when their parents went forward. And so just your heart kind of breaks a little bit.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it was. It was surreal. And it was one of those moments that all of the pilots were female at that time. But we looked at it, I was like, "Guys, you cool with this?" And they're just like, "Uh-huh."
Yeah.
Like, all guy, girl, like, because we had a med team on there. Our med team was fantastic. The Ravens were fantastic, and like grown men just melting because they see these children. So we brought the children back, and in all of our mind, we knew that still we haven't hit the hardest part of our day. Like, we had taken off from Germany, faced food poisoning, but we knew going back into LUD and the ground time was going to be the most difficult time during this. And so we take off, we go back, and we're kind of the lead of a push of a whole bunch of C-17. So I'm like, "Hey, we might be able to land. This is awesome." And we're right about our 24-hour crew duty day when we were getting into LUD's airspace. So I was like, this is going to work really nicely for us. Like, we're exhausted. It's mostly been me and the co-pilot, me and Caitlin flying the whole time. But we're going to land. Hopefully the offload's not going to be too long, and it's been a day. We get into LUD airspace. They tell us to hold over the field. We're like, okay.
Not even landed. You're just going to be in a pattern.
Yep. We kind of expected this because ground times were so long. It keeps the jet cooler being at altitude. Made sense. And so we're like, okay, cool. And then they call up to us, and they're like, "Your AR slot time is," and I was like, whoa, we don't need fuel. We're pretty good on the fuel. I mean, we only have 2 hours left in this day.
I don't think you understand. You're going to be up there for a while.
And they're like, "Your AR slot time is," and I was like, all right, I'm going to refuse the AR slot time. Who do I need to talk to? And they're like, "The air boss." And so I got on the phone with the air boss, and I was like, "Hey, sir, this is the situation. We're at our 24. 26 is our crew duty. We definitely have the gas to spare for that. Are you going to send us to a different place?" And he's like, "No, we're going to have you land at LUD." And I was like, all right, here's the thing. Like, I'm not going to stay up past the 26, mainly for the fact of, could we? Yes, physically, but it was just 2 of us as crew members almost the entire day. If Meg would have been fresh, I think we could have done it and extended longer if we needed to. But it was the fact of, was it a safe scenario to get fuel with 500 people in the back when I didn't necessarily need it, when I could still stay up to hit my crew duty day and then land and still keep my engines running? And so it was one of those, just like, let's look at a logical, like, checks and balance here. I don't need this. There is no reason to risk extra risk in this scenario. Is this smart? No. And so I talked him over, and I was like, "Hey, I don't need it. This is why I'm not going to do it." And he's like, "Cool, sounds good." And I was like, "I will be putting this jet down at the 26-hour point. You can keep me on taxiway. You can keep my engines running. I don't care, but I will not be flying past the 26-hour point, mainly for just the crew complement. Yeah. We need to land at that point." He's like, "You got it." So thankfully that went really well. We landed at the 26-hour point, sat on a taxiway, finally blocked in. That's still not the longest part of our day. We then tried to keep our engines running. The bathrooms were overflowing at this point because you got 500 people on board, and it's just nasty.
It is not made for that.
The smell was something that I will never forget in my life. The people were awesome. Like, they were thankful, they were awesome, but they were tired, they were scared. They were in a situation that they were unfamiliar with, and we finally have gotten them to a new place, and they were asking, like, "Where are we?" And only a few of them spoke English. We had a doctor, an Afghan doctor on there, and he was wonderful because he helped us translate. And so we'd literally give him the loadmaster's mic, and he could talk to everybody and have them sit down or do what we needed them to do at that time. But we got them there, and I remember calling up the ground ops, and I was like, hey, I need the lav like fixed now. And they're like, okay, you're gonna have to shut down engines 3 and 4. And I was like, that's how I'm keeping my packs cool. It is 115 outside. My cargo compartment's 98 degrees right now.
Cook
like
these people.
I need to keep these engines on. And they're like, we can't redo the lab. And I was like, okay. So talked about it as a crew, and I was like, I'm gonna keep 1 and 2 on. We're gonna cross flow all the fuel over to 1 and 2. And this was going with all of the jets. There are jets that had been on the ramp for 7 hours at that point, running, waiting for security forces and the PAX vans to pick everyone up, because you couldn't just let them off.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of pick them up and then bus them to a new location. So we had been listening to that, and everybody's talking about, hey, how much fuel do engines need to keep running before they flame out? And is it catastrophic damage if they do flame out? And you're sitting here.
I don't know.
Exactly. It's one of those things that you're just like, all right, how much can I push the envelope at this point? And so I phoned a friend. And this is kind of a story of the patch network and where they can help. I phoned a friend who, brilliant person, was going through requal at Altus in the C-17 community, a patch. And I phoned Stewie. And I was like, Stewie, dude, I need someone who, one, has a fresh brain, because I've been up right now for pushing 30 hours. And can talk me through the electrical schematics of keeping this jet and its engines running with the left-hand side going whilst turning off all of the avionics except my UHF radio. Like, I need you to talk me through what circuit breakers to pop and what switches to flip, because it's something that we haven't done
You're
before.
literally back there pulling breakers.
Like, literally trying to figure out how we can bring this jet, because if we keep her running without all the airflow on it and we don't put the airflow towards the passengers, we could fry all of our electronics. So it's like, how do we save the jet and minimize risk on the jet while still balancing the risk to the passengers at the same point and keeping them healthy and alive? Because you keep hearing people on the ground frequency call for paramedics because of heat stroke. Multiple heat strokes on multiple jets. And so you're sitting here, and Stewie's helping me out. Literally a godsend. And he's sitting there and he's like, okay, I'm not sure about this, but this is what I'm seeing. He has a sim-IP instructor literally next to him too, and they're talking through it. And then what I'm doing is then I'm going out on the radio and talking all of the other jets on the ground through how can you shut down the majority of your electrical system while still keeping the jet running and still keeping the radio on. And so we're doing that. We're making sure all that's getting pushed, and also trying to talk them through, okay, you need to cross-feed the engines. You can have 2 engines running. You don't have to have all 4, because everybody's exhausted at this point.
Yeah, you can't think.
They just need some guidance. And so it's crews helping crews at that point. We got the orphans off first around hour 3. I have a picture of me literally standing by a vent holding a small child up to it, just trying to get the airflow onto them. We had one woman that got heat stroke, and that we had to call an ambulance to get her off. Passengers then kind of become a little bit unruly. They become frustrated. I remember one gentleman walking up to one of my load masters saying, like, you're keeping us here like prisoners. We should have taken our chance with the Taliban. That broke one of my load masters. Like, that emotionally just so difficult for her. But altogether, like, it was taking it literally minute by minute, hour by hour to work through it. There were the majority of people wonderful. Finally, we did get them off. We sent the packs off, shut down the jet. They never came and fixed the lab, by the way. We actually called into ops, and they brought out buckets of kitty litter, and we created the galley. We created it into a makeshift bathroom for people. Like, that's where we were at with a lot of it.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's where it was.
A litter
at.
box. All right.
Yep.
I mean,
things happen, but it was better than them just going on the cargo floor of that jet. So we did that. We sent them in. We put our crew, we had to in-process and out-process every time through LUD. And if you've ever gone through LUD customs,
it's awful.
Because we weren't stationed there as a deployed crew, and we hadn't been brought into that side of the house, because it was the difference between en route and then, so even though C-17s don't get chopped, bureaucracy, as we call it again. So we had to take all our bags. I checked my crew into billeting, sent them to bed, got right in, back to tactics, where Kirby Wadan, who was the mission planning cell chief out there. I sat down with Metal and I was like, okay, catch me up on all the things happening, and just gave her a second set of eyes on some stuff and learned like what the current threat was, what the picture was between air movements and how we were flowing people in and out, and then what she was working on for the final night and how she was essentially planning that while all of this other chaos was going on, which was really cool to watch her just do her thing and crush it. Like, she was amazing. She was the class in front of me, so it was literally watching all that. I think that day was a 36-hour day for myself. It was 32 altogether with us being in the jet, but I was awake for 36. It was our longest day there. We did two more pack shuttle after that, including bringing out some of the people on the last day. We didn't have the final chocks, but we were out that morning with, we like to call them snake eaters. They're people that you don't ask them what they do. They just do what they do very well.
I've heard of them before.
Something like that. They were amazing. Just hearing a couple of their stories and the things that they did, that was very humbling to be able to airlift them out. And they had been there through the thick of it, as you know. And so it was very humbling to have that be part of our last crew. It was an amazing experience. But the things that I really took away, so you look at it and you're like, okay, how is that different being a patch versus a normal crew member, and how do patches fit in this scenario of Afghanistan? There's Shade, who literally got called at Charleston to go to Pope to start planning something that may or may not happen, along with a couple other patches. So they were doing the planning portion of it. There's people like Justin Cherry, who led and was literally the last C-17 on the ground, or he was one of the last C-17s on the ground that day that they did the retrograde as a Sol 2 pilot. There is Metal with Dan, who also was part of that, but then helped plan all of that mission and had the honor of doing that. And then Shade came back out, and she was the last air spare. So she didn't land in Kabul, but she was the last jet, no kidding, in Afghanistan airspace as the number 5 in that chalk coming out, which was wild. And she had just graduated the weapons school like 2 months prior, her and Scar. So Scar's leading like the Sol 2 side of the mission, going out there, and then Shade just had graduated, and she's both doing the planning and now as an air spare out there. Kirby was a year and a half, graduated from the weapons school, going out and doing the planning. And then sometimes you might find yourself where I am, of no kidding, okay, how do you become just part of the crew force but leading from within? So you don't necessarily have a planning role in this part, but you have to help and augment. So I was in there every day after I put my crew to bed, talking with the commander, talking with the NPC, helping where I could in that, while also going out and flying the mission, then bringing back the details to the NPC saying, this is working, this is not, we need to change these things. And then leading from the ground and being like, how can you just help a crew that's sitting next to you keep their engine running and keep the cargo compartment cool enough that you can keep people alive? Like, that is where you don't have to necessarily be in a given role as a weapons officer to be able to do what we have learned in this school of being a weapons officer. It's build, teach, and lead. And so how are we building our crew force? How are we teaching from within the ranks? And then how are we leading from either a designated position or just as a peer-to-peer leader, keeping everyone safe, keeping the mission going, leaning forward, making sure everybody has the equipment they need and the knowledge they need to be able to successfully operate in this. And I think that was really the biggest takeaway. It was the most grueling 3 weeks of my life. It was amazing the amount of support and the outreach that we received from like our brothers and sisters in the community from outside. I had black borders here texting me, especially after like there was rumor of one of the crews getting Q3'd for one of the first, like the passenger lifts and everything, where a lot of stuff happened. And they're like, man, if they Q3 them, like we're going to have a walkout here at the weapons school. And I was like, I love you guys. You are awesome. Thankfully, they're not going to get Q3.
Yeah.
It's just roommate. But just having that amount of support and love, and then people that literally aren't even in the Air Force just saying, thank you for doing what you're doing, keep going. Like, that is what fueled us as crew members, as just airmen hacking the mish, and what kept us going. And then I think each other, looking at each other, giving each other a hug, like looking each other in the eye saying, how you doing?
Yeah.
Like, are you good? There's still a lot of fallout from that. We talk about it a lot as a crew force, and there's a lot of angst. There's a lot of emotion that isn't quite resolved there, and I don't think it will be for a while.
No, there's a lot of, and you could look at it, and again, by no means are we trying to go political, but you guys were, just thrown into a scenario that you never should have been thrown into, arguably. Like trying to stay, but you never should have been thrown in that kind of scenario. And a lot of people think that these kind of operations, they just happen. There was so much logistics, coordination, mission planning, accepting risk that goes into all of these. And that's just naming a few that I can just name off the top of my head. And you as a mission commander or a dude or dudette on the ground that is running that team or whatever, or even if it's not somebody who is in a true leadership role or an MPC, mission planning chief or something like that, it's just somebody who's, you know what, I see something that is wrong, or I see something that needs to be done, and we're going to do it. You just rise to the occasion. And you've heard this, I'm sure you even say, we just athlete our way through it. And
yes,
and that's
what happened.
And that's what we do. So you had all the crews, all the mobility Air Force crews, all the ground folks, all the people support, the combat Air Force support in the air, the Army aviation, the 64s Apaches that were supporting in the air. All those folks, the Ravens that you mentioned, they just athleted their way through it. Some did, some struggled, some didn't. There was ebbs and flows in that struggle and that performance because of being tired. Situations changed on a dime, and you just athleted your way through it.
Everybody was doing the best they could with what they had. And that's kind of how we looked at it. It felt sometimes that the decisions that affected us the most weren't being made at the level that they needed to, as in closer to the fight, because I think they would have had a little bit more say on what needed to change or what needed to stay the same. But that was also a learning moment, and looking back on it was a lesson learned of, okay, how do we do decentralized operations and really delegate authority down? Like, that was one of our biggest takeaways and lessons learned as crew force. Like, that needed to happen sooner in our eyes. Mm-hmm. And I hope that was one of the lessons that was taken away by those that can actually affect that, because that was something that we really needed more situational awareness on, or I would say leadership almost needed more situational awareness on, like, just what was happening at that level.
Yeah, there's a certain type of or certain level of trust that involved in that. But then, we've talked about before. You have your mission type orders, and I'm walking out the door with commander's intent. I know what the intent is. I know what the mission is. I know what needs to get done. Now, get out. Unless you're helping me, you got to get out of the way, because I'm going with that, and I'll get updates, whether it's I'm trying not to use acronyms, but SIPR, secret emails, secret messages, whether it's just on my phone, and which is fine. I can update on that.
Yeah.
We'll go. Give me updates, and then I'm going to continue on. But in your case, until those folks are evacuated, until every American or coalition is evacuated, like, the mission's not over.
We still had a mission.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you got to keep going after it.
Yep.
And that's what, and for the folks that are listening, like, that's why the whole cargo thing stung. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that's your part of the job. You should be doing it. It's like, I'm there to get people out. Hell with the cargo. Like, unless it's something sensitive that, like, okay, we can't just leave this there. Okay, fine. But I am there to get people out, humans. And for that to be your first one, that is, I could see how that would be very frustrating, to say the least.
Because at that point, we didn't know. Like, we didn't know the reasoning. We didn't know the justification behind it. We thought either incompetence, being as air crew, we're like, they don't know any better. Incompetent, so you're going to do that. Or just defeat also was something when you finally like literally could not get it past them, they're like, this is what you're taking. And they were all GSA stamped, so you're like, this better be something really important. Like,
Still, did you ever know what it was? Still don't know what it was.
Still don't know how important it was.
It
Probably
might be better that you don't know.
Probably sat in a cargo yard for a long time after that. But it was after I started talking to the people that were on the ground and started really looking into it myself to find out like and how the scheme of maneuver was the first couple of days to figure out really what was the root cause of that. But at that point, sometimes you just got to trust that it's the thing that you need to do. And it's another reason why you have to keep your head in the game at all times. Like that portion could break you, but if that broke us, like we would have never got the other 3 PAX runs. And then we would have never even been able to do that 4th PAX run between Germany and Al Udeid. We were on the ground when the breech baby was born right in front of us. Our jet was pointed at their jet.
Really?
On the ground at Ramstein when that baby was born. It was wild hearing that radio chatter. Wild.
I bet that was.
So it was like those moments that like you kind of, it's just surreal. It's surreal going through it. It's surreal having those memories. We took off from Ramstein to go to Afghanistan, and no kidding, my weapons school classmate was in a jet ahead of us, and we're sitting there pretty much flying about 1,000 feet, like elevation. He was stacked above us, almost less than a mile in trail. And we're like, we should just declare MARSA, which is pretty much just creating a formation out of ourselves at this point, because we're right here next to each other. And we're sitting there talking on the radio. And it was surreal, because this is the things that you train for, especially as a C-17 pilot. Like, this is a core set of humanitarian relief that you want to be put in the fight for. So to be able to give, it's like Coach put me in, and to be able to be on the field during that time, it was an honor. But there was a lot that we need to take back from it, and we need to learn from it, and then we need to process. And that is why, like, the mental fortitude of it, having your min-essential list and knowing what you do, and then just leading from within or leading from your position and helping out each other. Those were some of the core things that when I talk about it with either the weapons school classmates or the WUGs going through during this time, so the students, like, we talk about, all right, what does it mean to be a patch? How do you do that? What does it mean to be a C-17 pilot when I talk to them about that? And it's cool now because a lot of those students actually participated as co-pilots in it or as young aircraft commanders. So it was really cool actually hearing some of my college classmates was up like flying caps overhead or refueling other guys, just doing those type of things, or even planning the air movement for the CAF side. That was cool to hear. So it was just a wild situation overall of you never know how you're going to fit into a puzzle or what piece you're going to be in, like in a given scenario of time, but you always kind of have to be ready for when that fight comes.
Oh, for sure. So, well, then I've got to ask you then, do you think that you were, before that, did you think that you were mentally prepared or had the mental fortitude? And if you did, like how are some of those ways that you built that strength up?
I felt at the time that I was prepared, but you don't know what you don't know in that sense. So I was prepared for what I thought it was going to be. And that is something that a lot of individuals didn't even know what they thought it was going to be. I have talked to co-pilots and load masters that are like, man, I wish somebody would have told me. I wish somebody would have just told me what we were getting into so I could think about it and really process that instead of just have it happen to me and be in the reactive stance.
Yeah, you land and all of a sudden you've got 500 people plus some 24 orphans and filled up lavatories and
that
just floor loading 500 people. Like knowing the back of the 17, that is no room to walk.
No. And so when you hear about like 800 plus getting in there, I still don't know how they crammed everyone into that.
No choice.
You have to constantly fight for information. That's really what it comes down to. And it's funny because I just listened like 2 weeks ago to a weapons school debrief, like talking about constantly fighting for information. And it is a constant thing. Sometimes you have to push the information. Sometimes you have to pull the information. And that's what I found myself doing, constantly fighting for information. So I was a little bit more ahead in that sense because I would drop my crew off, go in, check in with tactics, know that there was a current bomb threat on the airfield and that PAX couldn't bring bags on. That happened on our third run. Like, I knew that that existed. And so when we showed up to morning brief, I asked them to brief that current threat. And when we were over in Kabul, we couldn't allow bags on, and the ground crew was pushing back on us. And they're like, why can't these individuals bring their bags? Which I want them to, because that's literally all that they own at that point.
Certain level of threat.
Exactly. So it's how do you balance that? And I remember calling back to Kirby and the mission planning cell and saying, Kirby, like Metal, I need to know the most current information to this point on if this threat is still active. And I'm essentially trusting Metal with my life. Like if she says, cool, bring bags on, like I'm opening myself up to risk at that point. I'm opening the crew up to risk in the jet. But if she says it, I'm going to trust her, like with my life, literally. And she came back to me and she's like, let him. And I was like, okay, you got it. Because my information's like 5 hours stale at that point because I have gone through the sequence, flown over to Afghanistan. So I'm going to trust her. No questions asked. And it's one of those things that you just have to trust each other and have to have that knowing that, okay, you know what you're talking about. I'm going to trust you fully because I don't have all of this information. And it is what it is.
So,
sorry, answering your question, I felt like I was ready at the time. Was I ready for some of the things that I didn't, the cargo piece? I wasn't ready for that at all. Like you go out to do a mission and when your mission doesn't happen, like how do you deal with that? And when everybody else is performing the mission, you feel like a failure.
Yeah.
You really do.
Even though you're not.
Even though you're not. You did what you were supposed to do and what was asked of you. But you feel like a failure. And so coming back and actually talking about it with the crew, we talked about it a lot. And then being able to process it with people you really trust and someone that you can be very vulnerable with. That's why I called Shade and I was like, I need to talk about this. And like, I need to get the emotions out and to process this. And then I need to be able to move past it and continue on with the mission and have a plan going forward. And so working with that helped a lot. I remember when I returned back to McCord, I was angry. I was just angry. It was a weird emotion to have. I didn't expect it. But I was angry because everybody that greeted us at the jet was like celebratory. And they were like, welcome back, congratulations.
It's weird, isn't it?
Like, this is not what I need right now. Like, you guys shouldn't be here. You should be helping. Like, there is so much more to still do.